Have you ever walked into a perfectly quiet room, and yet it felt loud? Not with sound, but with something else. A strange pressure in the air. A mental hum you can't quite name. That's not your imagination. For many seniors, especially after 60, the home holds more than objects. It holds unfinished thoughts. A stack of unopened mail that quietly nags. A corner with bags meant for donation, now gathering dust. A closet full of clothing from a life that no longer fits. The clutter isn't always visible. Sometimes, it's emotional residue. The weight of delayed decisions. The presence of memories that no longer bring peace. You don't have to live like that. And you're not alone if your home feels heavier than it should. It's not about being messy or disorganized. It's about your home reflecting your life, and right now, your life deserves clarity. If any part of this feels familiar, take a moment to breathe. And while you're here, tap that like button. It helps more seniors find content that speaks to where they truly are, not where they used to be. And subscribe for more ways to quiet the noise, reclaim your space, and feel calm in your own home again. Now, tell us in the comments. Does your home ever feel louder than it looks? Vensy was 68 when she realized something strange was happening in her own home. She wasn't messy. She didn't have piles of junk or stacks of unopened boxes. Every room in her house looked perfectly fine, neatly arranged, calm, organized. But every time she sat down, she felt breathless. Not physically, but mentally. A retired architect from a quiet coastal town in Oregon, Vensy had spent her career designing buildings that made people feel safe. Hospitals, libraries, community centers. She was brilliant at creating space that worked. Yet somehow, her own home, the one she retired into, the one she thought would finally bring her peace, felt like it was closing in. It wasn't the walls. It was something else. Every shelf held things she no longer needed but couldn't quite release. Her home office still had project folders from jobs she completed a decade ago. The guest room closet had coats she hadn't worn since before her knee surgery. There were drawers filled with stationery from a friend who passed away. Nothing looked like clutter, but it all held energy. Lingering, silent energy. One afternoon, she sat in her reading chair by the window. It was raining, soft, quiet Oregon rain. And yet, the room felt noisy. Her shoulders were tense. Her mind raced. She stared out the window, then slowly turned her gaze to the bookshelf beside her. That's when it hit her. It wasn't that she needed more peace. She needed less weight. The shelf was lined with books she didn't plan to read again. Framed photos from a life she had already lived. Trinkets gifted out of obligation. She realized something crucial. Silence in the room didn't mean stillness in the mind. Her breath caught in her chest, not because she was upset, but because she hadn't exhaled in years. Not a real one. Not a full, honest, body-deep exhale. That moment, alone, in a quiet house, on a rainy Tuesday, was the beginning. She didn't start with a trash bag. She didn't set a timer or follow a checklist. She simply asked herself, what in this room makes me feel free, and what makes me hold my breath? That question changed everything. And it started a journey of decluttering not just her home, but the mental noise she didn't know she'd been living with. So if your house looks fine but feels tight, you're not alone. And Vensy's story might just be your mirror. There's a kind of clutter no one talks about. It doesn't sit in piles. It doesn't spill out of drawers. It's not loud in the traditional sense, but it interrupts your peace just the same. These are the unquiet objects. They don't shout. They whisper. Constantly. Like the treadmill in the corner that became a coat rack 2 winters ago. You don't use it, but every time you pass by, it sends a message. You should be doing more. Or the mug from your grandson's college visit, still sitting by the sink. He hasn't called in weeks. You don't want to let go of it, but looking at it stings just a little. Then there's the grocery bag near the door, filled with things you meant to return. 6 months later, it's still there. Not returned. Not used. Just quietly reminding you of an undone errand. These aren't just objects. They're emotional to-do lists. They aren't cluttering your floor, but they're cluttering your mind. And for people over 60, especially those aging alone or in transition, these objects can feel like background noise that never goes away. Not because they are big, but because they represent unfinished business. Vensy, our retired architect, noticed this most in her kitchen. She had a drawer filled with unopened teas from a phase she was going through, her herbal healing phase. She had journals she stopped writing in after her arthritis flared up. Even a pair of earrings from someone she hadn't spoken to since a falling out 3 years ago. Every one of those items had a voice. Not harsh. Not angry. Just persistent. She began to ask herself a powerful question. Is this item adding to the quiet, or interrupting it? That became her rule. She didn't throw everything out. But she listened. If something pulled her out of the present and into a spiral of shoulds, regrets, or nostalgia that hurt more than helped, she made a choice. One by one, she silenced the room. And her mind followed. So ask yourself now, what's one item in your home that keeps pulling at your attention? Not because it's valuable. Not because it's broken. But because it hasn't let you go yet. Tell us in the comments. Someone else might be holding on to the same kind of silence. Most decluttering advice starts in the same place: attics, closets, garages. The deep corners of a house where forgotten things hide. But for Vensy, that didn't feel right. She didn't want to start with memories. She wanted to start with movement. So instead of heading up to the attic or digging into storage bins, she walked to the front door. Just stood there, quietly, and looked around. What she saw wasn't chaos. It was pause. A pair of leather shoes with cracked soles she hadn't worn in years, ones she used to slip on for her early morning walks before her hips started aching. A floral print raincoat meant for wetter days in Portland, now out of place in her drier, coastal life. An old umbrella, the fabric stiff from time. And 3 reusable grocery bags, already packed, supposedly ready to be dropped off at Goodwill, except they'd been sitting there for months. Everything by the door had a job it hadn't finished. Everything near the exit was waiting to leave, but stuck. That's when Vensy came up with her own rule. Start where things are already trying to go. This became her exit route method. She didn't pick the hardest drawer or the biggest mess. She picked the spot that was practically begging her for movement. And it worked. Each item she picked up near the door gave her a tiny win. A release. It wasn't about memory, it was about momentum. She told herself, I'll only clear what's within 5 feet of the front door. And that single boundary made the task manageable, emotionally and physically. There was no guilt, no digging into sentiment, no pressure to make perfect decisions. Just one honest question for each item. If this were meant to go, why is it still here? And yet, one thing wasn't trying to go. Not obviously, at least. Tucked behind the coats and shopping bags, resting on a slim entryway table, was a single brown envelope. Unsealed. Yellowed slightly with age. Not junk mail. Not a bill. Something else. It didn't look like much. But Vensy paused the moment she saw it. And that pause? That pause unraveled something far deeper than clutter. We'll open that envelope together in the next chapter. But for now, here's a thought. If you had to start decluttering today, what's the very first thing near your front door that's quietly overstayed its welcome? Let us know in the comments. Because sometimes, the path to peace starts at the exit. Vensy didn't even remember putting the envelope there. It was tucked beneath a stack of folded canvas bags, wedged between a dusty walking cane and an umbrella with a cracked handle. Just an ordinary brown envelope, soft at the corners, sealed with a strip of old tape that had lost its grip. No name. No return address. No label. Just quietly waiting. She turned it over in her hands. The paper felt dry, a little fragile. She didn't expect it to hold anything important. Maybe some coupons. Or receipts. Something forgettable. But when she opened it, her breath changed. Inside was a list, handwritten in her own careful print. Books she had planned to read back in 2011. Titles like The Art of Forgiveness and Learning to Let Go. Beside it, folded into quarters, was a church bulletin from a spring service long past. And tucked at the very back, almost hidden, A single note on a torn scrap of notebook paper. Try again next spring. Vensy stared at the words for a long time. She couldn't even remember writing them. But the handwriting was hers. The message wasn't just a note, it was a timestamp from a version of herself who still believed she'd circle back. That envelope wasn't junk. It was a time capsule. Of hope. Of effort. Of paused plans. She wasn't overwhelmed with sadness. She didn't cry. She felt something quieter, like someone had just whispered, "You can let this go now." Because this was the moment she understood what had really been weighing her down. Not clutter. Not neglect. But expired expectations. That list of books? She'd already lived the lessons in other ways. The church bulletin? She'd found her own form of peace, far from any building. And that little note? She didn't need next spring. She needed this one. Vensy gently folded everything back into the envelope. She didn't throw it away, at least not right away. But she no longer felt bound to it. That was the difference. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like permission. From herself. Because not everything we set aside is a failure. Sometimes, it's just something that belonged to a version of us we've already outgrown. So here's the question. What's one object in your home that reminds you of something you meant to do, but no longer need to? Not something painful. Not something broken. Just something that can be gently released. You don't have to throw it away today. But you can start loosening your grip. The hardest part of decluttering isn't the dust. It's the decisions. What stays? What goes? What still matters, when the person you were back then feels like someone else entirely? Vensy faced this head-on when she finally opened the cedar box that had lived untouched under her guest room bed for over a decade. It wasn't a big box, but it carried weight. Inside, she found little artifacts of her travel phase, maps from a trip she never took, foreign coins she picked up in an airport gift shop, a travel journal with 3 hopeful entries and 15 blank pages. There were ticket stubs, postcards she never mailed, a sun hat still with the tag on. It wasn't junk. It was part of a dream that had since evolved. Years ago, she imagined she'd spend retirement exploring Europe by train. But then her sister got sick. And later her knees got stiff. And slowly, her definition of adventure changed. That's when Vensy created her own method. She didn't call it decluttering. She called it a memory cut. Simple rule. From any forgotten box, drawer, or shelf, she allowed herself to keep only 2 things. 2 items that still held emotional value and connected to who she was now, not just who she had been. From the travel box, she kept a small leather notebook her niece had given her before that almost trip, and a miniature compass keychain that still made her smile. Everything else? She thanked it, not out loud, but inwardly. And she let it go. No guilt. No harshness. Just editing. Not erasing a chapter, just trimming the pages so the story could keep going. This wasn't about being minimalist. Vensy didn't want an empty house. She wanted a meaningful one. One where every object was still in conversation with the present, not holding her hostage to the past. And this rule made decision-making easier. It gave her permission to honor her past without living in it. She wasn't forced to make 100 choices. Just 2. Box by box. Memory by memory. So try this the next time you face a drawer or a bin that hasn't been touched in years. Ask yourself, if I could only keep 2 things from this, which still feel like me today? You'd be surprised how much lighter you feel when you give yourself fewer decisions, and more clarity. Now tell us in the comments. If you opened a box from 2005, what would you hope to find inside? And would you still want it now? There's always one room we skip. Not because it's sacred or emotional, but because it feels irrelevant. Out of sight. Out of mind. For Vensy, that room was the utility space behind her laundry area. A narrow door. A bare bulb. Nothing dramatic. Just shelves. And silence. She hadn't opened it in over a year. Maybe longer. But one morning, something nudged her. Not guilt, just a quiet sense that the air around that door felt stale. Inside, it wasn't a disaster. But it wasn't safe, either. Old paint cans stacked 3 high, some rusting at the rims. Bottles of cleaning fluid, some half full, some sticky to the touch. A box labeled cords and plugs, filled with tangled wires for devices she no longer owned. 2 broken lamps. A cracked humidifier. Batteries that might have expired 5 Christmases ago. This wasn't clutter in the emotional sense. It was clutter of maintenance. Of what if? Of someday. And yet, this room carried a different kind of weight. Not nostalgic. Just heavy. Because when you're over 60, these rooms aren't just annoying, they are risky. The wrong chemical. The misplaced tool. A slick floor. A shaky shelf. Most seniors don't talk about it, but accidents often happen not in the visible parts of the home, but in these back corners we avoid. Vensy spent 2 hours in that room. She wore gloves. Took her time. Opened a window. She didn't need to keep anything, really. Most of it went into a contractor-grade trash bag. The few tools she actually used were moved to a labeled drawer near the kitchen. Everything else? Gone. She didn't expect to feel anything afterward. But she did. Not relief. Safety. She walked back through her home and felt something different in her body. Her steps were easier. Her breath more steady. She told a friend later, "I didn't know how much anxiety lived behind that door until it was gone." That's the thing about the unseen rooms. We think ignoring them makes life simpler. But avoidance is still weight. It just hides better. So here's a question for you. What space in your home have you quietly ignored for years? Not because it's sentimental, but because it's inconvenient. A garage cabinet. A laundry shelf. A corner of the shed. Something too dull to feel urgent, but too forgotten to feel peaceful. Tell us in the comments. Because those spaces might be the final barrier between you and the calm you've been chasing. Most people think clearing a space means making room for more things. But Vensy didn't see it that way. Once she had cleared the noise, the items that nagged, interrupted, or simply didn't belong anymore, she stood back and looked at the empty spaces, and didn't rush to fill them. That was the difference. There was a small table in her hallway that used to be covered in catalogs, loose change, and keys she hadn't used in years. After decluttering, it sat empty for 2 days. And then she placed one item on it. A single smooth stone from the beach near her childhood home. That's it. Not a centerpiece. Not a decoration. Just an anchor. Later, she added a small lamp her daughter had given her. Warm light. Quiet glow. It turned that forgotten hallway into a passage of peace. Then came a framed photo, not a group photo, not a staged portrait. Just a candid picture of her and her sister laughing over coffee one autumn morning. Suddenly, that space wasn't just clean. It was intentional. Vensy called it her quiet shelf. Not for display. Not for guests. Just for her. This was the shift. She didn't create empty spaces to prove she was organized. She did it to feel grounded. Each cleared surface became a canvas. But not for clutter. For meaning. This wasn't minimalism. It was something deeper. Memory architecture. A design that reflects who you are, not just what you own. People over 60 understand this in a way younger generations often don't. Because at this stage in life, the things we keep are no longer about collecting. They're about curating. Making small, intentional choices that reflect your values, your memories, and your peace. Vensy started seeing her home differently. Not as storage, but as story. Each empty corner wasn't waiting to be filled. It was finally able to breathe. And so was she. This simple act of redesigning space, of letting the room speak softly instead of shout with stuff, brought her more peace than any home makeover could have. So try this. Clear one surface in your home. Don't rush to fill it. Wait. Then ask yourself, what's one item I could place here that reflects peace, not pressure? Then watch what happens. To your room. To your mood. To your breath. Because when emptiness becomes a choice, not a gap, that's when your home finally feels like it's listening to you. It didn't happen overnight. There was no dramatic before and after reveal. No applause. No makeover montage. But a few weeks after she started letting go, really letting go, Vensy noticed something strange. She was breathing deeper. Not just when she was meditating or resting, but while folding laundry, while making tea, while walking from room to room. Her body was no longer bracing. She didn't realize how many tiny moments in her day had been filled with tension until they weren't. Opening the hall closet no longer came with that silent wince. Walking past the guest room didn't spark guilt about the untouched boxes. Even sitting down in the living room felt different, like the air was clearer, the walls were softer. It wasn't because she had a new couch, or because the space was suddenly stylish. It was because it had stopped asking things of her. Her home wasn't a to-do list anymore. It was a place to land. She started waking up without that low-level dread in her chest. Her mornings were quieter, not just in sound, but in feeling. She didn't feel behind before the day even began. And at night, she slept longer, more deeply, with fewer racing thoughts about things she had to fix, finish, or clean. What changed wasn't just the number of items in her house. It was the energy of the house itself. Vensy said, "It's like my home used to whisper at me all day. And now, it just holds me." That's the transformation most people miss. Decluttering isn't about impressing anyone. It's about feeling safe in your own space again. And for anyone over 60, that kind of peace? That's not decoration. That's health. Because when your environment stops pulling on your nervous system, you start living in the present. Fully. Quietly. Freely. Decluttering has nothing to do with emptiness. And everything to do with intention. You're not stripping your home of memories. You're giving those memories room to breathe. You're not deleting your story. You're simply choosing which parts to underline, and which parts no longer need to take up space. Vensy didn't downsize her life. She reframed it. She reimagined what it means to be surrounded only by what supports you, reflects you, and frees you. Because after 60, it's not about starting over. It's about living more clearly, with less noise, less pressure, and more meaning in every corner. She said something quietly powerful one morning as she sat in her newly peaceful hallway. "My home finally feels like a reflection of who I've become, not who I used to be." And that's what this entire journey is about. So if you've ever stood in your own home and felt disconnected, overwhelmed, or just tired, you're not broken. You're just ready for a new page. A quieter rhythm. A space that doesn't demand, but welcomes. You're not emptying a house. You're rewriting your script. And this chapter? It can be softer, calmer, brighter. One drawer, one shelf, one clear space at a time. So if this video gave you even one new way to think about your home, go ahead and tap that like button. It tells us this message matters. It helps others find it, too. Share this with someone whose home looks tidy on the outside, but feels heavy on the inside. Someone who deserves a little more space to breathe. And if you're looking for more honest, human, and hopeful ideas for aging with clarity and calm, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. We're building a peaceful space, just like you are, one step at a time.